Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Double 18 Podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Nagishi. Thank you for joining me once again on this Monday afternoon. And I am very, very honored to welcome this guest this afternoon. We were trying to reach out to this guest for a while, and obviously there was a miscommunication on my part as well. So I apologize for those who have been waiting for almost a half an hour. But we have RJ Ochoa, the managing editor of Blogging the Boys of SB Nation, covering exclusively about the Dallas Cowboys. RJ, welcome. Thank you very much for joining me today. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Of course. Thanks for having me. And thank you for being noble enough to say that it was your fault. It was my fault. I misread. So my apologies to everyone. Stephen was completely in the right. That's my bad, but I thank you for your grace.
No problem. It is an absolute honor to have you on our live stream this afternoon. Let's talk about your background and career a little bit. How did you become the managing editor of Blogging the Boys with the SB Nation, and what were you doing before and now where you are currently career wise?
I started, I was just kind of figuring life out about 10, 11, 12 years ago. And I was living in San Antonio, Texas at the time. And I just really had a passion for the Cowboys. And it was something that I just, couldn't stop thinking about, didn't want to stop thinking about. And, in conversation, I'm an only child. And so in conversations with my parents, it was a matter of, look, you can't do anything with this. You've got to figure something out. And I just kind of thought and dreamt like, I want to do this. And I didn't know exactly what it would look like. I think back then I was probably envisioning some sort of role like what we now know content creators to be. But I just started blogging. I started blogging for a site I could find at the time that would have me. Podcasts were getting off the ground. I was, we had a podcast at our site, and I told, the guy doing it, I said, hey, I'll do any kind of, whatever you need. So started to kind of just get some experience in that sense. A year later, I mentioned I was living in San Antonio, and the local sports radio station there at the time, their name was ESPN San Antonio, had a local, had a open mic contest, and, kind of come give your take type thing. And I was very, very fortunate to go do that and go through the process and win it. And that really kind of positioned me well to start knowing people and networking and just kind of making connections. It was also 2016, like I said, which happened to be the rookie year for Dak Prescott and Zeke Elliott, which was just this fever dream of a year for the Cowboys.
Yeah.
So given that this was my wheelhouse, they couldn't get enough of it. And that year, the Super Bowl was in Houston. And again, just kind of by an act of God as it pertained to my life. And they said, look, we can't pay for you to do anything. We can get your credential. If you want to be some extra hands, come learn some things, by all means. I had some family in Houston. I made the drive and, things like that. Just I did some high school football and just kind of saying yes to everything. And I had read Blogging the Boys for a long time and finally got on board with them in 2017. And a year later, this full-time role opened up, and I, at that point developed a little bit of experience in this, that, and the other. And again, God worked in my life to the point that I was able to get the job, and I've been able to do some fun and interesting things ever since. And it's never felt like work. I can't believe it's been over 7 years already.
Mm-hmm. From there, how did you ended up transitioning to the SB Nation? And you've kind of gotten your experience with ESPN San Antonio, and then now you are like literally, I don't want to say one man crew, but you are literally the man who leads Blogging the Boys, which obviously is a page on SB Nation that is very much dedicated to all things Dallas Cowboys. How did that opportunity came about?
Yeah, so I mean, the founder of Blogging the Boys, his name is Dave Halpern, and I actually met Dave when I was in high school, and I had gone to a Cowboys training camp with my dad, incidentally in San Antonio before I lived there. And Dave had given me his business card. I mean, this was 2007, and the site was brand new. I mean, in an era of message boards and things like that. And I had just always held that. And I, like I said, I would read Blogging the Boys. And then when I started blogging, it was for a different site, just because I didn't have the courage to email Dave at that point. But once I'd got a little bit of experience in the ESPN San Antonio thing, that was when I decided, you know what, let me reach out to Dave. And that's what I did in 2017. And so I initially came on board as just an independent contractor, the way our staff is comprised of people now. And as mentioned in the summer or spring of 2018, SB Nation was evolving in a way and designing some full-time roles to oversee certain sites, and Blogging the Boys was one of them. And so I applied and had experience at the site, had experience professionally doing radio and things like that. And it all just worked out for me. And so I've managed to kind of parlay one experience into another and been able to marry different things as I've worked throughout my career. I've been incredibly lucky. I've had the support of wonderful people each and every single platform and opportunity and avenue that I've stepped into, and I'm just incredibly grateful for the people that I've been surrounded by.
Mm-hmm. I remember I saw your tweet a while ago. You are going back to school, not, of course, not physically, but you are taking an online master's course with, I believe, with University of Florida, correct?
That's correct.
Has it started yet?
It did. It started last week. I submitted my first 2 papers yesterday as you and I are chatting. So it's been a fun new experience. And my wife has her master's degree, and that was a big kind of inspiration for me doing it. It's been, I hate to, I feel silly saying it's been amazing or anything just because it's been such a small sample size, but it's been fun so far.
What is the master's program, and what made you decided that you wanted to kind of get back, go back to school again?
Like I said, my wife has a master's. She's the smartest person I've ever known, and I admire her greatly and appreciate her support. And she's an adjunct professor in addition to her career and what she does. And so that was always something that kind of interested me. And so I know some people do that with I hate to say only a bachelor's, but without a master's degree. It was just a matter of kind of I've really found a routine and a rhythm that allows me some time to devote to certain things. And it kind of felt like, now's the time. My wife and I have a 3-year-old, and I'd rather do this now before, he's got baseball practice or something like that.
Sure.
Just rather devote this time when he's going to bed at 8 p.m. and whatnot. And times like this, football season are a little bit more stressful, but I'm fortunate to work in a way that I have half of a year that is a little bit more flexible. Obviously talking about the spring semester. And so it's a master's in digital journalism. And so I just want to amplify the skills that I've kind of owned along the way. I feel confident in my skill set, certainly. But a lot of it is kind of learned on the ground or in the air while flying the plane. And so I'm anxious and interested to learn more and to connect with other people in my classes, and certainly professors that are world-class at the University of Florida.
When you say digital, what exactly is digital? Are we talking like video, or are we talking basically mostly within the context of internet?
I think that in my life, in my career specifically, I look back at when I started this 10 years ago, and when I would live stream, just doing that in general was this really unorthodox thing. I obviously had some experience at the radio station, and I would explain to them that I would go live on the internet. They found that to be very strange. They found that to be very unorthodox. And how are you doing this? What kind of audience is it? And at the time, I think about a platform like StreamYard. I would have my laptop set up to stream to Facebook, and I would have my iPad set up to stream to Periscope at the time. And I would have my microphone recording into GarageBand so that I could take the audio and process it into a podcast. And, it was a lot of duct tape and glue and sticks and whatnot to kind of figure things out as I went along. And a lot of that has changed. I mean, that's just from a logistical standpoint. But even the way I approached covering something, I mean, now a story happens and I have a kind of a routine and a rhythm and a process of, okay, I've got this piece of meat. This is how I'm going to process it. I'm going to, cut this part into hamburgers, this part into whatever. And, I'm going to save this part. I'm going to freeze this portion, whatever. And I kind of know the way I want to, rock and roll in that sense. And so that has changed, and that has, evolved, and that has, been adjusted as a lot of the internet has changed. And I would offer, I think you would agree, that the pandemic accelerated a lot of what we do online. And I think certainly made even my master's program accessible online. I hate to say that it was a good thing that came from the pandemic, but certainly an evolution in terms of how we function as a society. And so that being said, I have no idea, I'm 35 years old, but I have no idea what this will, whole world will look like a decade from now, right? I revisit a decade ago and things are wildly different. I don't ever want to rest on my laurels, and I don't ever want to, assume that what I have going on is just going to be enough to carry me through retirement. I want to make sure that I not only have the skill set to be able to adjust, but also have the opportunities and the avenues and the proper resources. And so in that sense, when I kind of did my flow chart, it all sort of pointed at get some help, and grad school felt like a way to do that.
Mm-hmm. My guest today is RJ Ochoa, the managing editor and also contributor of SB Nation's Blogging the Boys. Talking about the state of the media right now, obviously, there's no doubt that whenever people talk about certain topics like the Cowboys, LeBron James, and among other things, it does generate a lot of clickbaits, likes, and so forth, whether it's coming from the writers or the athletes turned pundits right now. How do you feel about the current state of the media landscape? And for somebody like you, of course, who have been doing this for a long, long time, you've obviously cultivated and developed your own brand. How do you feel about people like you, like the more of an independent people like you, EJ Schneider, Brett Coleman's of the world, certainly carving up a great niche, talking about football versus the traditional media and their suddenly no longer having the tight grip on the overall sports landscape these days?
I think about it from the perspective of, I'm a Cowboys fan, obviously, but I'm a Houston Astros fan. I'm a San Antonio Spurs fan. I love golf. And I obviously consume an inordinate amount of media, whether that's on my, pick your device. And I have a 3-year-old, right? I, work from home. I walk my dogs. Like there's all these ways, like my life and the custom tailoring I would need to absorb what it is I care to absorb is very different from you or very different from anybody else. And so I think that's where people like this have found that I don't even want to call it that niche, but that opportunity, because when we were growing up or whatever, it was a matter of you were just kind of stuck. And even though I'm a Cowboys fan, there would be times when I was in high school and the Cowboys would have this, amazing performance or whatever. And I would have to wait patiently for whatever it was, Sports Center or NFL Network at the time, to discuss even the Dallas Cowboys. And so that was always frustrating to me. And not only having to wait, but wanting them to talk about things in the way that I wanted them to talk about, and feeling like, great, they won or lost, but this was super important. You're missing this key point. You're not giving credit or credence to this specific idea, or you're not giving this player any kind of grace. And so I think that this world offers that. The most successful thing I do from a direct, standpoint is probably our post-game shows. And the reason for that is obviously our interaction with fans, because it's a situation where I don't approach with any kind of rundown. I don't approach with any kind of, I want to make sure I hit this. It's a matter of, they just won, they just lost. I'm excited, I'm pissed off. And then somebody says, I can't believe that so-and-so fumbled. I can't believe that, they called this timeout. I can't believe the ref blew this. And that becomes our talking point. That becomes our rundown. That becomes our ticker. That becomes everything we're doing, because it's truly people's show. I'm simply in those moments a vehicle for their thoughts and opinions, and hopefully able to amplify them with a little bit of, tact and a little bit of logic, and hopefully some charm and humor as well. And so I think that we all have these types of interests that, we're seeking, for lack of a better term, content around, even if it's not sports. Like, even if, you like cooking, even if you like knitting, even if, the other day I was using a tool here in my office and I didn't know how to use it, which is embarrassing, but I YouTubed how to do that. Like, maybe your thing is hardware design. I mean, I have a 3-year-old. I've watched a million videos of kids playing with toys because that's what he likes. And so, I know the ever-changing landscape of media from a cable standpoint, or a cut the cord standpoint, or a digital subscriber standpoint is what it is. but we're now able to fully and totally customize what it is we consume, when we consume it, how we consume it, and where we are when you consume it, whether that's in front of your TV, in front of your computer, laying in bed at night, on the road, listening to a podcast. Finally, ultimately, we're the people in charge, and we're able to choose who we like.
Outstanding point there, having control over, the contents that we put out there versus on the traditional level, carving out a niche that I think a lot of people are dying versus the traditional talking points like you see on ESPN and FS1 nowadays. All right, let's move on to our subject that we've wanted to discuss, the 2025 Dallas Cowboys. Of course, right now, we can't ignore the Cowboys without the current saga involving Micah Parsons and the Dallas Cowboys / Jerry Jones at the moment. I want to know from what you're hearing, within the team or anybody that you're connected to, where is this currently standing, and will this get resolved eventually?
I certainly have no insight to offer. If I did, I would certainly use it. But the historical context here is you and I are chatting on August the 25th. The CeeDee Lamb deal was taken care of on August the 26th last year. The Dak Prescott deal was taken care of on the day the season literally began. It was announced essentially when the mornings and actives were that Sunday. Now, the CeeDee thing, even though it was a day later, it was further away from the season opener just because of the way the calendar worked out, and Dallas plays on the Thursday to start this season, which isn't Thursday Night Football. That's a gripe of mine that people always call it Thursday Night Football. It's Sunday Night Football on Thursday. It's very dumb and confusing, but we can at least be proper as a society.
Right, it's on NBC.
Exactly. So this whole thing was predictable. I mean, and not even that it would. Obviously, the contentiousness of it wasn't predictable, or Micah requesting a trade. Like I'm not trying to be naive or pretend that the entire thing was predictable. But Micah first became eligible for a contract extension in March of 2024. There was no reason to believe that he was going to be satisfied playing this whole thing out or whatever. Now the ridiculousness of it has evolved with Jerry, having the informal conversation with him and whatnot, and the insistence on working without an agent. It is a tale as old as time, and I think Cowboys fans are pretty worn out by it. It's not even entertaining anymore. This is a bit of a longer idea, but I think that when we look back on, when the world ends and somebody writes a book about the Cowboys, their playoff loss to the Packers last year is a really important inflection point. And it really kind of broke people in a different way. And I recognize that sounds silly and funny to a lot of people because, the Cowboys generate a lot of memes and a lot of screaming culture. But while the Cowboys had some heartbreaking playoff losses to that point, many of them, they fully fell on their face, and they fell on their face as the 2 seed against a 7 seed. No 2 seed had ever lost to a 7 seed. Granted, that hasn't been possible for that long. They had been undefeated at home for 2 years. They had all the benefit in the world going their way. And so to lose as embarrassingly as they did to the Packers, who it seems you also hate. So at least, we park our cars in that garage together, was really demoralizing. And that was followed by Jerry Jones gaslighting everyone and saying that the team would be all in over the ensuing offseason. And not only were they not all in, they were particularly inactive relative to years past. The 2 big free agents who they brought in last year were Eric Kendricks and Zeke Elliott, who they brought back. And it all just kind of felt like a joke. And there are way too many things to discuss, but last year was just such an incredibly toxic year. And then it ultimately involved the CeeDee deals and the Dak deals, which were predictable that they dragged out. And I think people, I don't want to say forgave them or gave them a little bit of benefit of the doubt back. But this offseason, despite the fact that it got off to another left foot with waiting on firing Mike McCarthy or departing from Mike McCarthy and, wandering into Brian Schottenheimer, people had started to kind of come around and at least stop being a 10 out of 10 on the anger scale. And then this whole situation happened, this situation that was predictable. They had all this time to take care of. And so it just feels a little bit for people like they were willing to trust this front office one more time. And of course, Lucy pulled the ball out from them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It feels as though this one seems a little different than the traditional holdouts. Like you mentioned with CeeDee Lamb and Dak Prescott. I don't think, neither of those two guys have been as vocal and has been open about the frustration of the contract negotiation that is going nowhere, and it certainly will not go anywhere without the presence of Parsons' agent, super agent David Mulugata, who obviously represents other well-known NFL clients. Circumventing, of course, the agent doesn't seem like a good practice. I know Matt Schaub, former NFL QB, now running to be the NFLPA president, is trying to, put Jones on notice, regarding those types of practices. Eventually, if Parsons do ended up signing, do you have any idea what kind of a contract we're looking at in terms of the length and the amount, guaranteed money? Do you have any kind of a ballpark estimate?
I don't, but I mean, I think in situations like this, it's pretty commonplace to say, who was the last guy? What did he get? And let's just apply the tax of being the new guy. I fully expect this to be to have all the bells and whistles of being the highest paid non-quarterback in NFL history, certainly highest paid, defensive player in NFL history. That will probably be true from an annual average value perspective. That will probably be true from a guaranteed money perspective. That will probably be true from a total guaranteed perspective. I don't know that Micah, as much, I know that people feel like he doesn't have leverage, but I wonder if he's willing or able to procure a no franchise tag clause, a no trade clause. I mean, these are inordinate levels of power that the Cowboys have been forced to surrender to different players in contract negotiations, most notably Dak Prescott. I mean, Dak is the king of dominating the Cowboys in this arena. And so, I mean, those are tangential parts of it, but from a numerical and quantitative standpoint, I fully expect Micah to clear each and every single bar. And I did want to add, because most people don't really recognize this, because it is different. I completely agree with you, and certainly more contentious than Dak or CD ever got. But I very vividly remember at the Super Bowl in Miami following the 2019 season. So this was January, February 2020, shortly before the pandemic obviously hit the entire world. But at that moment in time, Dak Prescott's there doing the car wash on behalf of whoever it was, Sleep Number, Old Spice, whatever. And at the time had just finished the final year of his rookie contract. So was set to fully hit actual free agency. Granted, he would ultimately be franchise tag, but he was asked many times about the looming contract situation and intimated. I don't want to directly put words in his mouth, and the quote's out there if you run a quick Google search, but suggested that he might hold out. And might not at least might not show up to OTAs, at least might not show up to mini camps. That did not become possible, obviously, because of the onslaught of the pandemic and that the fact that everything was virtual. So if you want to call that a weapon or a card to play, not showing up to mini camps and OTAs, we never got to see Dak Prescott fully weaponize or authorize that. So I do wonder if the Dak situation would have gotten a teeny bit contentious, just because of the fact that we never got to see it. And had that happen, if we're, living in the world where the butterfly flapped its wings the other direction, maybe situations with Dak change for ensuing deals. Maybe the situation with CeeDee Lamb never gets that way, because the Micah deal is different, not only in terms of the contentiousness, but that Micah has gone this distance with the Cowboys. If Dak had been the one to do it, it may have created an alternate timeline for players who followed him, obviously.
Mm-hmm. We'll get to Dak Prescott in a little bit in our conversation as we continue with RJ Ochoa of SB Nation's Blogging the Boys. Let's talk about the Netflix's America's Team Gambler and His Cowboys, which is a docuseries on the Dallas Cowboys and, of course, Jerry Jones. It's got some, good reviews among other people, but at the same time, as we were discussing the contentious contract negotiations with Micah Parsons ongoing, and then the timing of this being released at the same time, Mark Schleff came out and said that they're the Jacksonville Jaguars with better PR, and then some have also said that this is nothing more than a PR, soft piece for Jerry Jones, etc. Of course, you were also in certain episodes. I haven't seen much of it, but you've been featured in some of the segments or episodes, I should say. What are your thoughts on the the docu-series so far, and how does that help or hurt Jerry Jones's perception of being out there?
It's a conflicting set of emotions for me. Some of that
Yeah,
is that I wound up being featured in it and didn't know that, so it was this really delightful surprise, and certainly makes me a little bit biased. But the fan in me, the nostalgic in me, the romantic in me, honestly, thinks it's cool. Thinks it's cool for posterity. Thinks it's cool. I mentioned I have a 3-year-old son. I mean, to be able to tell him these stories and for him to, when he's age appropriate, because this documentary is a little bit intense, understand, not only that at one point in time this team was great, but what made them great, and obviously what they had going on off the field as well. I do think that the timing of it is, I mean, when you're facing a 30-year drought, nothing is ever good timing, right? Like everything can ultimately get spun, or can be spun into, you haven't won the Super Bowl in forever. The Eagles just won their second Super Bowl. Like, I mean, there's no shortage of material to work with to drag this team. And I think that's where people are conflicted. My read on the fan base is people appreciate the stories of the past and whatnot, but it is frustrating to see how hard they tried, how much they worked, and how important winning was to them. I do think the documentary chronicles, maybe unintentionally, how those priorities changed. And I know you mentioned the Mark Schlereth quote. I'm not here to defend the Cowboys by any stretch, but they're not the Jacksonville Jaguars. Like, this is a team that I mean, make all your playoff jokes. Again, there's a lot to work with there. But in the regular season, they've won like the 6th most games in the last 25 years. Like, they just have this horrible, routine and pattern of falling flat when the moment is the brightest. And so it is very strange for them. It's almost like by design, they're good enough to be that toxic. I mean, it's a happy accident, certainly. And maybe that has been part of the reason for their rise in, I don't want to call it popularity, but in terms of discussion, because people love to talk about how they continue to fall short. But I do, I know you all wrote about Kyle Brandt's rant about this the other day, about how they're a content company, they're an entertainment company. That's
right. Yeah. He did say that.
I have, in the past pushed back against that. And I don't think that they wake up and, spend an entire day working towards those goals. But those things are very difficult to dispute nowadays. They may not be true,
Right.
but they are very, very difficult to dispute. And I think the Micah deal, the Dak deal, the CD deal, I mean, we could spend hours, talking about things that are objective data points that, teams who are trying to win a Super Bowl simply don't involve in their operation. That there is no way to logically justify much of what they do. And it sounds ridiculous that the two conspiracy theories that, are hard to believe, but again, we're this far down the rabbit hole that you have to give some credence to them, are that they're doing it for attention, they're doing it to stay in the headlines, they're doing it for the clicks and whatevers, and that they don't have the liquid cash to, obviously come up with a signing bonus, come up with the guaranteed money at the beginning to literally pay the money when the swoosh of the pen happens. Again, these are things that sound preposterous. I recognize that, but why, what else could be the reason other than the will to be toxic? I mean, that would be the only other one that I could come up with here. But I'm not a wrestling fan, but it is all very WWE like, except they're telling you, I guess wrestling
Like
does
scripted,
well.
right?
Yeah, like they're telling you, this is totally real. And everyone actually knows it's real. At least WWE and all wrestling in general, we all have an understanding of what is at play here. That's not the case here. And I think if there is one silver lining to this, I think, and I think you would agree, the national media has been much harder on the front office for the last year and a half now, much harder from the perspective of what are y'all doing. And I do hope that at the very least that leads to some grace given to Dak Prescott, some grace given to CeeDee Lamb, some grace given to Micah Parsons, Brian Schottenheimer, maybe some reverse grace given to Tony Romo and Des Bryant, understanding that what they're trying to accomplish in general is a very difficult thing. But unlike most teams in the NFL, they're doing it with the handicap of their ownership and front office making matters more difficult.
Mm-hmm. Let's dive into the team itself. The hiring of Brian Schottenheimer caught a lot of people off guard, in a way, because he didn't really have a strong track record, even as an assistant coach. Most recently with the Seattle Seahawks as an OC there as well. Pete Carroll literally gave him a boot there, which obviously sometimes when you get booted by a legendary coach like that, that's not exactly, a good look, even with your last name being Schottenheimer, of course, the son of late Marty Schottenheimer. Your thoughts on the initial hiring and, now that, the angst and all that has somewhat subsided amongst the Cowboys fans. How do you feel about the initial hire news to where you are right now as the season approaches?
I think the context of how he was hired matters. And I think, I've been a very public supporter and defender of Mike McCarthy relative to most people. I think Mike, and I think that matters here. I think Mike lost a PR battle to Aaron Rodgers a long time ago. And many people just decided that he was worthless and a buffoon and whatever. And the man has been given no credit for a lot of things. I think he's the most successful coach the Cowboys have had throughout this drought. They won 12 games in 3 straight years. They hadn't even been a playoff team in consecutive years. And, no coach had done that, in the entire era. And so they let Mike McCarthy enter last year in a contract year, which was insane. And a lot of his staff, and they brought Mike Zimmer in on a 1-year deal. I mean, it was, sending him down the plank, whatever analogy you want to come up with. And not only did they do that, but when their season ended and the wild card round began in the NFL, they didn't make a move. When every team who was firing or dismissing a head coach did so on that Monday or Tuesday after, they sat and absorbed all the, again, it's difficult to refute that they're doing this for the purposes of absorbing attention. It wasn't until the Monday of Super Wild Card round night, that game the Rams played against the Vikings, that Monday was when it finally came out that they were going to be moving on, mutually parting ways, whatever. And of course, at halftime of that game is when they're connected to Deion Sanders. And so because they waited on Mike McCarthy through the wild card week, they were not able by NFL rules to interview virtually, but still the number 1 seeded coordinators. So they couldn't interview Ben Johnson. They couldn't interview Aaron Glenn. They couldn't interview the Chiefs coordinators. Not that anybody did, but the point still matters. And so you've already begun this process in an inefficient manner. And then they spent that week predictably interviewing Kellen Moore and Robert Saleh and Leslie Frazier. And it wasn't until the Monday after the divisional round that Brian Schottenheimer emerged as a name. And the only reason he did so wasn't because he had been requested for an interview, was because he was the betting favorite. Betting markets all of a sudden had Brian Schottenheimer as the favorite. And then after that, it was reported that he was requested to do an interview. And obviously all of the dominoes fell. For a team that seemingly loves attention, I don't know if you recall, this news about Brian Schottenheimer being hired came out at 9 p.m. on a Friday. It was almost as if they were ashamed. I mean, it was almost as if they were hoping nobody saw. It was a very, very tense time. And then his introductory press conference featured Stephen Jones somewhat attacking his own fan base in saying, and I'm quoting here, this drought that people say we're in, and used air quotes to refer to a 29-year drought as if it weren't, in just a literal sense, a drought. And so, I mean, these dudes were really poking and pressing at all of their people, which I think made life very difficult for Brian Schottenheimer. That's why I think this context matters. And it wasn't until he began speaking, and he got to speak at the Combine, obviously, and other opportunities. And he's quite charming. He's quite charismatic. And I think that he bought a lot of people in slowly over time. He assembled a proper coaching staff that people, started to really enjoy. He had a lot of passion, a lot of gumption. And I think that that's gotten people involved and behind his cause. And then the preseason started. And at that point, it was as if, some air just started to leak out of the balloon. His teams looked nothing like what he said he wanted them to. Granted, it was under the presentation and context of being preseason. But he's talked a lot about wanting to be physical and disciplined and not committing penalties. And I mean, it was almost as if, again, it was ironic in that they did everything to counter what he said was going to be their disposition. I think those waters have calmed a little bit, but I do think everyone's questions from the back of their mind have resurfaced, and everyone truly is wondering, was this just a puppet? Was this just a guy, or did they actually find a diamond in the rough? It was a very, I don't even think unconventional is the right word. It was a one-of-one path to finding him. And we're going to find out pretty soon. I mean, that's just as the head coach. Forget the fact that he's also the offensive play caller. So it is a very, 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 total true mystery box that we're about to unwrap next Thursday.
Now, speaking of the quarterback, Dak Prescott has, is coming back from a serious injury that knocked him out, and obviously had a massive impact on the Cowboys season last year. where do you rank Prescott in the quarterback rankings, and how does he fit into Brian Schottenheimer's system? As you mentioned, he is a play caller as well. How do you feel like that, the Schottenheimer Prescott relationship is going to work?
I think where Dak ranks, I think right now in the NFL, you have 4 absolute kings, and you can rank them how you want, but you've got Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, Lamar Jackson. Those dudes are on their own tier, and you can certainly argue that Mahomes is, on a smaller tier, even above them, just from an accomplishment standpoint. At that point, I think the conversation begins. If you want to put Dak in that tier, if you want to have a smaller tier that only features certain dudes, I think individually he's and I know this is difficult, whatever, for people to process. I would take him over Jalen Hurts. I think Jalen Hurts is wonderful, and that conversation gets complicated as well. He clearly, and this is okay, benefits from the talent around him and the coaching and the support. All those, none of those things are Jalen's fault. But I would not trade Dak for him, because I think that Dak is more capable of putting on a superhero cape and flying to save a city in need, like the Cowboys seem to be, for lack of another analogy. And so I think Dak is somewhere in the top 10. I think he flirts with top 5 or 6 on a given day, just depending on what's at stake. But he passes the test of the proverbial test of, can you win a Super Bowl with this guy? I absolutely think so. Now, how he and Schottenheimer will work together is truly unknown. I mean, it truly is. When Mike McCarthy, not only when he was hired, he was not the offensive play caller, because Kellen Moore was retained, and so we obviously had a level of understanding of how Kellen Moore was going to call the offense, because he'd done it before, even though it was under Jason Garrett. But when Mike McCarthy took over play calling, it was very easy, even though it had been a while, but very easy to look at Green Bay and say, okay, this is what they did. This is, this will probably be a lot like what this is about to be. And to your point, that doesn't really exist here. Sure, we can go back to Seattle, but the final year of Brian Schottenheimer there was very contentious with the let Russ cook, phenomenon and whatever. So it's difficult to know. And it's also ironic, the Cowboys have this incestuous relationship with their head coaches, and that Mike McCarthy obviously challenged the Dez play and was the coach over 3rd and 20 in 2016. Brian Schottenheimer's, dysfunctional Seahawks offense was the team that the Cowboys beat in Dak Prescott's first playoff win in 2018. Yeah. And so a big reason for that was also because their offense was largely inept that night. And so you kind of have to go back to Schottenheimer's time running the New York Jets to somewhat gain an understanding of what this might be able to look like if you are throwing away the Seahawks stuff, which is fair to do. But even those teams, were prominently run-based and defensive-based. And even if you want to believe the Cowboys are going to be run-based, which isn't a Dak Prescott thing to not answer your question, they had LaDainian Tomlinson and Sean Green. And with all due respect, Javonte Williams and Jaden Blue are not those players. And so it's very, very difficult to kind of ascertain who they're going to be. And on top of all of that, they traded for George Pickens, which, I don't know that they traded for George Pickens to hand the ball off to Miles Sanders. So I expect them to be more of the same on offense. I think they're probably, again, to the Mike McCarthy point, he took over play calling in 2023 for this team, and there were some bumps to start the season off. I will fully acknowledge that. But that season ended with Dak Prescott finishing 2nd in MVP voting, and CeeDee Lamb, arguably as the most productive receiver in the NFL, setting every single Dallas Cowboys franchise record from a receiving standpoint. And we sit here and give Mike McCarthy zero credit for that. We as the offensive play caller, we say he had nothing to do with it, whatever. So even if you do believe he had nothing to do with it, Dak Prescott and CeeDee Lamb are still there. I mean, if you believe that they were that good, that they succeeded in spite of the Ofu you're unwilling to give any kind of credit for, then I would offer it doesn't really even matter what kind of impact Brian Schottenheimer is going to bring.
By the way, I got a message here. I was watching Shotty in the Oxnard for 2 weeks, and in that short time, he's already much more creative on offense than McCarthy did in 4 years. I don't know if you had any chance to look at the or follow anything while what was happening down in Oxnard. Would you agree with that sentiment, or is it too early to draw that conclusion?
Yeah, I think it's way too early, with all due respect to pissed and broke. Right now we've had the full sampling of Mike McCarthy's restaurant. We haven't even walked in the doors of Brian Schottenheimer's. Like we're looking at the menu that they have outside of the restaurant. You know what I mean? So it's way too early to be able to say anything. That's not to say that it can't be true. But at this point in time, we simply don't. I don't even want to say have enough evidence. We don't have any evidence to work towards this premise. And so the first opportunity to, celebrate or roast everybody in that regard will be next Thursday night, obviously.
Now the defense looks to be a lot different under Matt Eberflus, and full disclosure, many followers or who watch this live stream know that I'm a big Chicago Bears fan, and I've had a lot of issues with Matt Eberflus, as a head coach, and also him being a defensive coordinator. Unfortunately, in a circumstance where former DC Allen Williams was abruptly resigning, and there was some weird, crazy stuff about FBI raid in the Hallis Hall involving him and so many other things and whatnot. But having seen Matt Eberflus's defense with Chicago from 22 until 24, up until last year before he got booed after the Thanksgiving fiasco in Detroit, which was finally well-deserving and whatnot. How do you feel about his hiring? Of course, he was a linebackers coach with the Dallas Cowboys for several years, coached up Sean Lee and among others. How do you feel about his fit with the Cowboys and the system that he brings in?
I do. I love Matt Eberflus. I recognize that's probably not a popular opinion for you and your contemporaries.
Well, maybe as a head coach,
Right. But he was the Cowboys linebackers coach at a time, not only where Sean Lee was playing, but where Rod Marinelli was the defensive coordinator. And so he was the effective defensive coordinator, even though the Cowboys wouldn't take that title from Rod Marinelli, a post that Chris Richard also held after him. I would offer that if any singular person was critical in the development of Sean Lee, it was Matt Eberflus. And you mentioned it, Damian Wilson, Anthony Hitchens. There were a number of non-Sean Lee linebackers who played really well. And I think we don't give Matt Eberflus credit, and maybe you coped yourself into this at the time of the hire. He followed Josh McDaniels to Indianapolis when he took that job that he ultimately resigned from, and then made it work with Frank Reich. And obviously that was a whole situation. I mean, that was a very difficult thing to do. I mean, I already really liked Matt Eberflus at that time, but I was really impressed in that 2018 season, and particularly because if not for Matt Eberflus and coaching up Shaq Leonard, Leighton Vander Esch would have won Defensive Rookie of the Year. So he directly inhibited that from happening. And so I think it's very clear and fair, more than fair, to say that he was overwhelmed being the head coach of the Chicago Bears. It's very unfortunate that it didn't work out. The Cowboys have said it at a number of turns that he was going to be this team's defensive coordinator regardless of who the head coach was, which is already an undermining of Brian Schottenheimer, but I digress. I'm very happy about that. And I think, it's only the preseason, but so far we've seen a number of linebackers down the roster flash. DeMarvion Overshown is still on ice, obviously, but Jack Sanborn, who's a player he brought over from Chicago, has played really nicely. Right. Maris Liufau, a third-round pick last year. Damone Clark in the final year of his rookie contract, and a fellow Florida Gator in Shamar James, who had an interception last Friday night. So it does feel like when you play a video game and you get like the cloak that boosts your acceleration by like 20 points or whatever, that's what Matt Eberflus is for the linebacker position. And I'm excited to kind of watch it, once the games start mattering.
I've got another comment from Piston Broke here. Let me show it to you. You have to agree that the bike Mike, I believe that maybe bike was not there. Mike did a lot of slant routes and curls, minimum motions. I mean, Shotty already has Kevondre Turpin in the backfield. You got any rebuttal there?
I just would say that that's great. We need to just see it in the regular season. I'm not standing outside the restaurant with you and committed to saying the restaurant sucks. I'm just saying we haven't.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like let's
preseason. You won't reveal the whole lot of thing.
Yeah. I mean, I'm completely open to the fact that this might wind up being true, but to say that it's true now beyond a shadow of a doubt is unfair and unobjective in my mind.
Mm-hmm. Looking at the preseason now that it's over, and roster predictions, I know there are many cuts are being going to be made as we speak right now. Who stood out to you the most, offense and defense? And as far as the roster prediction, I've been writing a lot about a couple of articles on Mazi Smith on Fansided about his time with the Cowboys, etc. Who stood out to you the most in preseason? And do you think Mazi Smith will still be on this team?
I think standouts offensively, Phil Maffa, who they drafted out of Clemson, has really shined, and people are going to be upset if he doesn't make the 53-man roster. And then defensively, I would offer Shamar James as an example. I mean, 2 of their rookie draft picks, obviously, and that's not me trying to be biased, but and that's always nice to see. That is a corroboration of we like these guys, they're playing well, and they're hopefully points of depth for us for the life of their rookie deals. As far as Mazi is concerned, I mean, we're well past the point of having to admit, being forced to admit, forcing the Cowboys to admit that this did not work, that it was a miss, it was a flub, whatever. And a lot of people have, again, we're speaking on Monday before roster cuts are finalized. A lot of people believe he's going to be cut. I just don't. I don't see what the benefit in that would be. I recognize he's not a good football player right now. But that being said, I mean, the money has already been spent, so to speak. And not to live in a sunk cost fallacy or anything like that, but the only reason if it were me, the only reason I would cut him would be if he was actively a demerit against what I was trying to do. If he was an active hindrance against what we are trying to do. It's one thing to say he's not a very good player. He can't help you a ton. But the idea that you're going to cut Mazi and go get an impact player to fill that roster spot, I think that cutting Mazi would just be therapeutic for some people. And there's an argument to be made that maybe it's worth it in that sense. But I just don't see it happening personally.
One thing I would say is that, I remember Taco Charlton, another Michigan defensive lineman who was a standout in college, who failed miserably with the Dallas Cowboys. And you have Mazi Smith, another defensive lineman from Michigan. And I think a lot of people still have nightmares from that experience where Taco Charlton did nothing to endear to the fans on and off the field, perhaps, of course. And Mazi Smith hasn't really flashed. And, and now that he's already gone through 3 different coordinators with Dan Quinn, Mike Zimmer, and now Matt Eberflus. So, if he hasn't flashed it, the odds of him thriving under, Matt Eberflus seems like a little bit like a low percentage at best. You get what I'm saying, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would not bet on it happening, to be very clear. But again, I mean, if he's the 54th guy off the team, who's he 54 behind? Who's 53?
Yeah, right.
What are we achieving by cutting Mazi at this point in time? And I understand that some people again might feel like, look, getting rid of him sends a message that even if you're a first round pick, blah, blah. I think some of those things are a little bit more hollow than we want to believe, but I understand that there's some level of legitimacy to those ideas.
Mm-hmm. A couple more minutes with RJ Ochoa, the managing editor of SB Nation's Blogging the Boys. Let's look at the upcoming NFL season. Perhaps, we talked a lot about your Dallas Cowboys, but the league overall in general. What kind of storylines you're looking forward to this upcoming season? Let's start about the Kansas City Chiefs. It seems as though many pundits are trying to knock down the Chiefs after getting blown out by the Philadelphia Eagles in Super Bowl 59. Do you feel like the Chiefs are on the downturn, or do you still wouldn't bet against Patrick Mahomes until otherwise?
Yeah, I mean, we're on year 9 of Mahomes or whatever.
8 or 9, something like that. Yeah.
And he's never finished shy of obviously of the AFC Championship game. He's, I know that like he finally didn't get to host one, and we really got him. You know what I mean? Like they had to play that one on the road. And so maybe that's the beginning, right? Like maybe that's the first chink in the armor, so to speak. But I'm not saying that I'm penciling them in to win the AFC or anything like that, but I'm certainly not bearing them. I think that would be foolish. I think that would be just trying to reach. It's totally possible that the Bills could finally break through, or the Bengals or the Ravens or whoever. And I know we're all desperate for that. I know I don't understand the Taylor Swift fatigue. I don't know why that bothers people, but I know that exists. But whatever. So are they a different version of themselves? I was going to say a shell. I don't think they're a shell themselves. I think they're different. But again, until they miss the playoffs or bottom out for their standards, I don't think that you can fully say that like their dynastic run is over. I think if we've learned anything, I mentioned I'm a Spurs fan and an Astros fan. I think we've had to redefine how we look at dynasties, and dynasties or dynastic runs can involve losing titles, losing Super Bowls, losing World Series. Like just you don't have to be Joe Montana and be 4-0. Nobody like that in and of itself is a very, very rare thing. I mean, I'm a Spurs fan. Like I said, do we look at their run and say, well, they lost that one to the Heat? No, of course not. I mean, do we look at the Astros and say like, oh, did they lost, one to Juan Soto's Nationals? They lost another to a really good Braves team. No, we I mean, like, the fact that you can make it, and the Astros are the most obvious comp for them because of the run they had getting to so many ALCSs in a row. That's insane. And so, like, I don't know. I kind of don't want it to end in a weird way. And part of it is I don't want the Eagles to be the team who ends it. That would be a little bit annoying.
Yeah, that'd be
but to answer a very short question in a long way, I'm not willing in any way to say that anything is over.
Yeah, I'm not ready to write them off just yet. But just in case, in the AFC West, Denver or Los Angeles Chargers, who do you give a better chance of dethroning the Chiefs?
I think I probably give the edge to Denver. And I feel bad because there's a lot of Chargers and the Cowboys, and I'm sure it's frustrating that, nobody really takes them seriously. I have no qualms with Justin Herbert, but, like the same arguments that people want to apply to Dak Prescott, you could apply to Justin Herbert. I mean, the fact that it's been so long, we haven't seen any level of success. I'm an Arizona State Sun Devil, and Bo Nix had a cup of coffee with Kenny Dillingham, so I'm inclined to believe in a quarterback that Kenny vouches for. And so I also feel I don't fully believe in Sean Payton the way a lot of people do, and some of that is some Mike McCarthy bias. I mean, they get talked about and are revered in very different ways despite identical resumes and whatnot. But I lean Denver just narrowly, and I don't feel great about it.
Mm-hmm. Looking at the other AFC teams, it seems as though, of course, the AFC North is probably the most loaded football division, in addition to NFC North, of course. Outside of Cleveland, I think maybe Baltimore, Cincinnati, and Pittsburgh. You could all make the argument that those three teams could make the playoffs. Talking about the Pittsburgh Steelers, of course, with Aaron Rodgers is probably his last stop there, more or less. How do you see that one playing out? Do you feel like that's going to save? I don't want to say Mike Tomlin's job. It's kind of preposterous, but there is certainly a pressure on Tomlin to get it done this time around. Do you see Rodgers as the savior, or do you feel like this is another crash and burn type situation?
Yeah, I think, the Steelers are the way Sean Payton and Mike McCarthy are the same. I think the Steelers and the Cowboys are pretty similar. But we look at the Steelers and we look at the never finished below 500 record as this like point of pride. Right. And it's cool. Don't get me wrong. But I mean, it's actually not that great. Like it's actually kind of, frustrating, I imagine. I used to say, and this was true or is true, that Tony Romo never played in a game where he was mathematically eliminated from playoff contention. Like do we sit here and say like he should be in the Hall of Fame for that? No. I mean, it's cool and interesting, but so I think Pittsburgh's that team, and I think that Aaron Rodgers is kind of hoping they're going to be that team because it would obviously be unfortunate to go out the way his Jets career went. I will say it's kind of refreshing that even though the Steelers are this Tiffany brand, that we haven't had the Aaron Rodgers of it all shoved down our throats the way that we did with the Jets for 2 years. So in that sense, I mean, I'm actually kind of interested. I'm kind of interested to see how it works with DK Metcalf and whatnot. I am also interested to see, relative to the Cowboys, how George Pickens fares with Dallas and what that says. I mean, I mentioned the incestuous nature of it all. I thought Dak Prescott had a lot of success with Mike McCarthy and got along with him, and Aaron Rodgers didn't. And that was kind of an interesting dynamic. So the Steelers clearly felt like George Pickens couldn't work in a world where Aaron Rodgers was going to be their quarterback. And so if Dak Prescott can make George Pickens awesome and make him not be the way that Pittsburgh thought he was, that will, at least be an interesting takeaway in my mind. But I'm interested to watch Pittsburgh in the occasional, Monday night game or whatever. But yeah. I think we all think that they have a pretty low ceiling.
Mm-hmm. Who are you picking out of the AFC?
Not to pick against Kansas City, so understanding that they deserve their own qualifier for obvious reasons. I think I'm ready to say that I think it's Buffalo's year. I think they just feel right. I think they have everything going for them, and I think that you have to you have to lose a little bit before you fully know, what it takes to kind of get there. And I don't think the Bengals have lost enough. I don't think the Ravens have lost enough. I mean, the Bills are kings of having their heart broken by the Chiefs. I know there's a long, line there, but the Bills are at the front of it. And so I think, they know what's at stake in a different, emotional way than anybody else. And so I could see this finally being the year where everything ties together for them.
Right. Your Cowboys have certainly contributed to their misery as well back in the 90s.
Right.
All right, let's move on to the NFC. And I know this is probably really difficult for you, having to see Philly and Washington playing the NFC championships, this past in January. And then, Washington coming out of nowhere to really, take it, almost, take it to Philadelphia before they succumb to it. Philly or Washington, who do you give the better chance of representing the NFC?
I'm sure you're aware that no NFC East team has repeated as a division champion in over 20 years now.
Right.
So, and you don't have to win your division, obviously, to win the conference. But if I had to bet on anybody breaking that curse, it's probably this year's Eagles. I mean, they're just so well run. They understand how this whole thing goes. You can count me among those who think there's a bit of a regression to the mean coming for Washington. Despite the fact that we're talking on the day of ultimate good vibes with Terry McLaurin finally getting done. I just think that, they were 8-1 in one possession games last year. I mean, I don't mean to poke at you in your experience, but if that Bears game doesn't happen, I mean, but it's that the point is like,
right.
It's that delicate.
Changed the trajectory of
it's that delicate of a thing. And so if this crazy impossible thing doesn't happen, no one is even asking the question that you just asked, you know what I mean? And so it's difficult to, like, the Eagles have 3, 4, 5 times over earned the benefit of the doubt for us to be like, they'll figure out a way. Washington, congrats. And I know you're all happy. It must be nice to have a new owner and feel like, to actually have the skies or the clouds part and the sky be blue and know that there is a new day. But just because there's a new day doesn't mean that success is promised.
Mm-hmm. Looking at the NFC North, my Bears are hopefully finally ready to, get out of the cellar there. It's a tough division. The Bears are, I'm going to be realistic. I'm sure it's going to take time, even with Ben Johnson as a first-time head coach. But I do believe the team is on the upswing. The division, of course, sent 3 teams to the playoffs. I was watching a local sports show here in Detroit the other night, and 2 guys who writes for, locally, column-wise, John Neo and Bob Wojnarowski, they were like, NFC North isn't as tough as people say it is. They still think that it's Detroit is the class above the division and everybody else that are beatable in some ways. Of course, I understand that they can talk shit for the lack of better terms, but do you agree with that sentiment, or do you still feel like NFC North is a toughest division in all of football?
I think that I underestimated Matt LaFleur when the Cowboys hosted the Packers, and he proved
that was a playoff, right?
Right. And he proved to me that he's certainly worth his salt. And in fact, I would say he might be the best coach in the division. And I think Ben Johnson could certainly be that way. He's just unproven, green, raw, whatever. Like we need to see some stuff.
Right. We need to see it. Yes.
I fully agree that Kevin O'Connell is amazing. I also, I sort of hate the Lions in a weird way, and I don't hate the Vikings, but I mean, and I unfortunately look at the world through a Cowboys lens. If the Cowboys had lost that playoff game the way that Minnesota did, I mean, we wouldn't stop talking about Mike McCarthy, having them unprepared. And we've, in fact, a year and a half later, been talking about Mike McCarthy. I just told you that I underestimated Matt LaFleur because they beat Mike McCarthy's team so badly. We have not offered like a single arrow to be slung at Kevin O'Connell for the Vikings losing that game. Instead, it's just, it was Sam Darnold. And the whole season was impressive. But, I mean, yes, it is still worth noting that they were a disaster. And similarly, the year before, the Lions blew a 17-point lead in the NFC Championship game. Right. And how many people have ever brought that up? I mean, and they were very, 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 very good last year.
Sure.
But then they lost to a team who we both agree was a little bit in over their skis after having the bye. And so I don't mean to say that I think they suck or I think they're terrible. I think losing both coordinators is obviously a difficult thing to get over. I think the Lions have built up a little bit of the benefit of the doubt. But I do, the Lions were very annoying to me. I don't know if you recall in late 23 when they visited Dallas on a Saturday night game that was broadcasted on Monday Night Football.
I remember watching that.
Yeah, one of those weird quirks.
The pass to Dan Skipper, I believe. Right?
So there was this whole, and look, that benefited the Cowboys. I'm in no way gonna deny that, but it was an improper call. It was an unfortunate thing, but the Lions held this insane resentment about that, and I understand that on some level. But when they went to AT&T Stadium last year to play the Cowboys, who had willfully sabotaged their team, I mean, they were running trick play after trick play, and it was a matter of, okay, if you want to sit at the big boy table, then you need to act like an adult. You need to put your pants on. You need to stop acting like a kid at the adult table. And I think that you can't be both. Like, I think the Chiefs have done a great job of going from this team that nobody really cared about to becoming a national powerhouse. I think the Patriots did a great job of that. Okay, Lions, you want to do that? Do you want to be the Chiefs or the Patriots, or do you want to be the Jaguars or the Browns, who had their moment in the sun and then ultimately returned back to the cellar themselves? So I just find their insistence on pay attention to us, we're amazing, blah, 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 to be a little bit annoying. But maybe I'm just jaded. Maybe I'm wrong. But to that whole point, I don't think the NFC North is like robust. I could totally see a world where Chicago wins it. Because the Lions are weakened. The Vikings, again, no one is willing to say or out loud that Kevin O'Connell had a horrible playoff game. And the Packers, I mean, I think Jordan Love parlayed that win over the Cowboys into a massive extension, and good for him. But yes, what else has he ever really done in his career that is impressive?
Mm-hmm. Quick look at the NFC West. Rams have Matthew Stafford on the mend. Seahawks looks like they have Sam Darnold, and we'll see how far he can go there. Taking his magic to Northwest. San Francisco looks like they're a wounded duck. I don't know how much of a credence we should give, or at least a chance, to Arizona. Who do you like out of the NFC West?
I think I've always found it interesting how the Rams are covered. It's almost like nobody cares that they're an NFL team. It's very strange. Like the Matthew Stafford thing. If that were Baker Mayfield, it would lead SportsCenter every day. I mean, it was crazy. Also earlier today, Cam Akers was released by the Saints.
Yeah.
Do you recall when there was that story, like he's never playing again? This relationship between Cam Akers and the Rams has been burnt up, and it's just irrecoverable. What was it? Like that we never heard anything about what that story was. So they're this weird operation, and so I have a hard time trusting them. And so I don't trust them to contend or compete. Even though they were impressive, obviously, late last year. I think Seattle is – I worry for them that they might be back to who they were before the Legion of Boom and everything clicked in 2012, and might revert back to, just kind of the occasional team that you see on Thursday Night Football. I think that San Francisco is I don't know what you call them, a wounded duck, but kind of like the Cowboys. I mean, they were snake bit last year, and I think that we have completely forgotten about who they really are. And as a Cowboys fan, I will never. That's the bad guy that you don't just knock out and leave on the ground. Like, you got to chop his head off and make sure he's dead. So I'm not willing to bury them by any stretch. I do think Arizona is interesting. I've always felt like Kyler Murray doesn't get enough credit. And he's so dynamic. And I think Jonathan Gannon, again, everyone just talks about the press conference and the Zoom thing or whatever. But I think Arizona could be a team that surprises. That's the one that I've kind of got my sneaky eye on.
Mm-hmm. Who do you have coming out of the NFC? Is it Philadelphia for now?
I'm looking at my set of mini helmets here to fully make my pick. I mean, it's just so difficult to get back, right? Like, Kansas City is the only real example. And so I will say that history works against the Eagles, but I mean, I'm certainly, if you came back from the future and told me they were there, I would obviously believe it very easily. I don't believe in Detroit. Yeah. If I have to mix it up, I mean, I don't think it, if it's, I mean, I really could see Washington getting there just for the karmic energy that it would be for the Cowboys. I mean, like you talked about how that was devastating, and it was, but that night was awesome. I mean, from my perspective, the night they beat Detroit, because it established that Dallas had the longest drought, obviously, of NFC Championship game appearances, and particularly in the first year of new ownership. It wasn't just getting a new quarterback. It was having a former Cowboys staffer as their head coach. But I mean, it was the most soaking wet point of proof that you could have that ownership matters. And so why not? Why not have Washington go? And at that point, if they were to go and win it, then all three NFC East teams would have won Super Bowls since the Cowboys last had in 1995.
Mm-hmm. Well, on that note, RJ, thank you so much for joining me today. I had for a little over an hour, and I also want to thank Piston Broke. Good show, gentlemen. Thank you so much for commenting there as well. Had a wonderful conversation with RJ Ochoa of Blogging the Boys on SB Nation. Please make sure to follow RJ on his X at RJ Ochoa, which is that correct?
That is correct. Good job.
Okay, wonderful. RJ, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. I look forward to doing this again in the near future. Good luck to you on your work with the Blogging the Boys, and also not to mention your grad school with Florida State's journalism school there. We look forward to having you on again, hopefully before the end of the year, to talk more about the football and how your school and everything. Thank you so much for your time tonight.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much. And thank you for even asking about grad school. Most people don't. I may be new to the university, but I will just say definitely the University of Florida, not Florida State. That's.
I apologize.
No, that's the one line
that's
you don't cross.
School, of course, I understand. Sorry about that. Well, thank you for your time, RJ, and enjoy the rest of your day, and look forward to speaking with you again sometime during the NFL season. Take care.
Likewise. Have a good one.